Thank you for coming out. We want to hurry up and get this started because Dr. Esposito's talk is going to be fabulous. So, okay, thank you for coming out. We want to thank our sponsors first, the Arabic and Asian Language Office, Texas A&M University at Qatar, Religious Studies, Glasscock Center, International Studies, Texas A&M University Libraries Diversity Committee, and the Muslim Faculty Network. Dr. Esposito is a university professor as well as professor of religion and international affairs and of Islamic studies at Georgetown University. Dr. Esposito is founding director of the Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding in the Walsh School of Foreign Service. His more than 40 books and monographs include The Future of Islam and Who Speaks for Islam? What a Billion Muslims Really Think. Dr. Esposito is editor-in-chief of the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Islamic World, which is 6 volumes, the Oxford Encyclopedia of the Modern Islamic World, 4 volumes, the Oxford History of Islam, the Oxford Dictionary of Islam, the Islamic World Past and Present, 3 volumes, and Oxford Islamic Studies online. He has been interviewed and written articles with newspapers, magazines, and the media in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He's also been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Economist, the Guardian, the Times of London, CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, and the BBC. A native of Brooklyn, New York, he currently resides in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Dr. Jeanette P. Esposito. His talk tonight is titled, The U.S. and the Muslim World. Where do we go from here? Please welcome Dr. John Esposito.
Well, since my talk has already been described as, I don't know what, indescribable, that's my own word. We can quit now and go to drinks and dinner. But I'm being videotaped. Good. Okay. That will assure that I'm better than I usually am. I mean that I'm a good boy. That's right. Good. Very nice. Good. I did a talk, and I won't name the city, and they didn't remind me that it was going to be live on NPR. And I said things that I really believe, and I'm happy that I said them, but a lot of people weren't very happy because I sort of named names. You know, you sort of kid around after a while, and I talked about the dark Vedas in my profession, who the administration listens to, and then there's the angel of light, as I portrayed myself. And the next day on one of the websites, they literally had a picture of me. I tend to get somewhat dynamic when I speak, and most of the pictures of me usually have me like this. So they got one of those, which I hate, and in fact they have my hand up like this, almost like Hitler, and they had little devils all around, because I had talked about the dark Vedas, so they were kind of saying that I was satanic, and it was very interesting. But anyway, I'm delighted to be here. You've got gorgeous weather, and I'm happy to be talking about the topic I'm going to talk about. I've tried to configure the topic in a certain way that I will look at relations between the Muslim world and the West in terms of the current administration, what the current administration promised, what the facts on the grounds look like, how now, I bring it up through the transitions that's taking place now in the Arab world in terms of the pro-democracy movement, and what does that mean in terms of administrative policy. Let me begin by thanking everybody who made this trip possible, because it really took a lot to put this whole thing together, and I really want to thank everybody for all of the efforts that they made. Now, when President Obama came into office, he came into office with, for some, there was a great deal of expectancy. For those that supported the Obama administration, and for many in the region, not so much rulers in the region, many of whom, this is not meant as a negative comment on the Republican Party, coming from a lifelong Democrat, but many of whom would have preferred and felt safer with a Republican president. That is, that McCain would have been seen as continuing, or close to continuing, the policy of President Bush. And Obama just, A, they couldn't be sure of him, and B, what Obama was saying was to talk about a much more independent policy, distancing himself from, and was a critic of the Bush legacy. So all of that was in play. But what's important here is that President Obama set out an agenda, many politicians do, but I would tend to emphasize that he really presented himself as a person with a vision in a way that some politicians don't. It wasn't just a couple of generalities. I mean, he was setting out a sense of vision and master plan for a kind of new approach to relations with the Muslim world. Obviously, he also was setting it out with regard to social policy in the US, but I'm concerned with this particular part of the world that I know something about. And there was a hope among those that supported him that now one would see a reemergence of a kind of global principled leader and a sense of a leader who could restore relations, a more constructive path forward in relations with the Arab and Muslim world. One who could deal with the two kind of myths, in a way, that were flying around. One, that there was simply an American war against global terrorism, and two, the perception in the Arab Muslim world that this so-called war against global terrorism was and had become an excuse for a war against Islam and the Muslim world. A war against Islam and the Muslim world. Put very concretely by a good friend from Cairo, who the day after 9/11 said that she hoped that I was okay, that my family was okay, and that certainly we would want to go after bin Laden, but she and others wondered whether this would be the beginning or the end. And when I asked her what she meant, she said, would this become an excuse, going after bin Laden, for a redrawing of the map of the Middle East by the United States, more in line with US interests. And we know that Secretary of State Powell had initially assured that we were going to go to Afghanistan to get bin Laden. We weren't even interested in regime change, but when the Taliban refused to cough him up, we then did get into regime change, and before that was really, in fact it still is not over, we were then talking about going into Iraq. But we had reasons to go into Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, and then when we couldn't find that, except that the Vice President keeps assuring us that they're there someplace, or the former Vice President, we then talked about the promotion of democracy in Iraq and in the region. And so as that policy unfolded, for many in the region, it looked like there was an uneven playing field here. The notion, for example, of an axis of evil, as it were, but one in which all the countries, with the exception of North Korea, were Muslim. And with North Korea, despite the fact that it had nuclear capability and has it, and feels free to set it off and let us know that it has it, we always maintained we could deal with them with diplomacy, and yet other countries that didn't have it, may have been on their way to have it, or that were seen as a problem, we were kind of strutting and threatening a military response. So here comes the administration with a new paradigm. And the new paradigm was that we were going to, or the administration was going to move away from the Bush legacy. Obama was pretty direct about that in his inauguration, and then he set out a kind of vision in his two initial famous speeches in Ankara and then in Cairo, but also the first major international interview that he did was with Al Arabiya, being to the Arab and Muslim world. So there was far more attention being given than anybody even expected. And that attention talked about a more multilateral relationship, moving forward hand in hand, one based on respect and mutual understanding, and one based on the principles that the United States stands for, and the presumption being here the self-determination, democratization, human rights. Absent often in our discussions at that time, but I think the president was aware of, and I think it was reflected in his Cairo speech, was the kind of data that you get from the Gallup organization. And in terms of transparency, I am a senior scientist with the Gallup organization. I'm not sure what the phrase means, but it certainly sounds impressive. Because I'm not a scientist, I'm not good at science, but it's that broad use of the term scientist. So I'm some sort of expert with Gallup. But both Gallup and Pew have been bringing in a lot of hard data and providing us in the book, Who Speaks for Islam, What a Billion Muslims Really Think. We lay out a lot of that data, providing us and provide the administration and others in the world with a perspective that's often been absent in the way that we talk about the Arab Muslim world. You see, the way that we often talk about it is that you invite experts. Whether you testify before Congress, or you go and do programs, I speak to the Pentagon or J5, CENTCOM, etc. So you've got experts. Well, the problem is that, to begin with, the experts can have very good credentials and give you diametrically opposed positions. They did it with regard to cigarettes, so the cigarette industry had, as I like to put it, their PhDs lined up, experts, and then the other side had their PhDs lined up, and they might even come from the same university, with diametrically opposed advice. It certainly became even more of a problem during the Bush administration, and here obviously I'm talking about the more recent President Bush, not the senior President Bush. Junior, let's just put it that way, in so many ways. But the reality of it is that the problem that we developed as a result of, and it's understandable, global terrorist attacks and the conflicting game plans that were put out there, because we had Israel advising us and saying, see, it's happened to you, it happens to us. We had authoritarian regimes all say, see, the very thing we have a problem with, you've now experienced, so give us the aid, support us to fight the extremists in our country. But very often, many of these governments, like Tunisia and Egypt, etc., were really talking about anybody who was in opposition in the country and kind of, look the other way. Well, now, with the data, what we also have is the input of the very people we're talking about. So you don't need Esposito, although please do continue to buy my books. And my most recent one just came out this week, Islamophobia and the Challenge of Pluralism in the 21st Century. Beautiful red book. It was supposed to come out on Valentine's Day. But you missed Valentine's, but you can buy it for Eid, for Christmas, for a birthday, for a loved one. But anyway, let's get back to the talk. But the reality of it is, we now know what Muslims actually think. It's not just what I say or somebody else says. Because no matter how good we are, no matter how much we as experts have been in the field for years, traveled all over the world, to be in a position where you're testifying and people are saying, what do they want? What do the Egyptian people want, the Libyan people? One of the factors we ought to have is some listening to what the Libyan people really have to say. Often what we've been up against is that both experts and media go to a country, and who do you talk to? You talk to the elites. So for example, during the problems in Tunisia some 20, 25 years ago, or in Algeria, you would have experts would go over and they would talk to the Algerian government and the elites, and they would say, how do you see things? And what do you think of your opposition? So the elites would tell them about their interests, and then instead of going and even talking to the opposition and their supporters, they would then ask elites in the society to also describe what the opposition was like. Well, now we can find out what people actually believe and say, who they are. So, instead of arguing theoretically, are Islam and democracy compatible, why not find out whether Muslims think that they're compatible? Or why not find out whether or not Muslims want it? Because part of what people were saying is, look, because of Arab culture and Islam, they really don't want democracy. Their culture can't really handle it. But we discovered when we went with the data that majorities in the Muslim world, Gallup looked at some 35 countries, it's now up to about 50 countries, representing more than 1 billion Muslim voices, said that they want freedoms, democratization, rule of law, end of corruption. Does this sound familiar in terms of what's going on now? I mean, we've known that now